Ma chambre a la forme d'une cage. Le soleil passe son bras par la fenêtre. Les chasseurs à ma porte comme les petits soldats qui veulent me prendre. Je ne veux pas travailler, je ne veux pas déjeuner, je veux seulement oublier et puis je fume. Déjà
we won't have time today to talk about the motivations for dialetheism. In the next conversation, I would like you to give us some examples, concrete examples of dialetheism. Could you close today's conversation by giving us a brief survey of those philosophers who did come close to deny the principle of contradiction?
Yeah, okay. So this is contentious to a certain extent, and I'll explain why in a second. But fairly uncontentiously, some of the pre-Socratics, so this is Aristotle's predecessors, were dialetheists. How do we know? Well, Aristotle tells us so himself. So coming back to that passage in the Metaphysics, he tells us who his targets are, and they include Heraclitus, Protagoras, Anaxagoras. Now, of course, his historical scholarship might not have been great. After all, he's talking about people who have flourished 100 years, 200 years before him. But at least he takes them to be that. And if you read the bits that remain to us of these guys, like Heraclitus, he does tend to sort of blatantly endorse contradictions. So it's certainly not an implausible interpretation. Once you get past Aristotle, there have been very few philosophers who've been game to endorse contradictions. Such has been the influence of that passage in Aristotle, and why it's been so influential when it really isn't up to scratch as a piece of persuasive argumentation is an interesting question, but let's leave that aside for the moment. Probably the philosopher who has been the most obvious dialetheist after Aristotle was Hegel. And some of his intellectual descendants who subscribed to dialectics, maybe Marx, maybe Engels. So what you find in Hegel is this theory of dialectics. And dialectics, to describe it in very neutral terms, is a dynamic process in which contradictions arise and are transcended. The German word is aufgehoben, and no one knows how to translate it into English. So the contradictions arise, they're transcended, you get new contradictions, and then you get this ongoing process, right? That's the dialectic. So prima facie, in the dialectic, it looks as though contradictions arise. They hold, they're true at certain stages of development. So prima facie, it looks as though Hegel is committed to the thought that, at least in certain stages of development, contradictions hold. That's the obvious reading of the text. Okay. Now, of course, if you think that only an idiot could endorse a contradiction, and Hegel is your favourite philosopher, you're going to say, well, of course, when he talks about contradiction, he doesn't really mean what a logician means by contradiction. And to be fair, you know, if you read Hegel's logic, often he plays sort of fast and loose with the notion. So there are times when he calls something a contradiction, and a modern logician wouldn't. So, you know, there's some justice in this claim that when Hegel talks about contradictions, he doesn't mean what logicians mean. However, the more closely you look at the text, the harder it is to sustain that reading, at least in my opinion. I mean, I think I'm out of kilter with a lot of Hegel interpreters here. I don't think my view here is the majority view on Hegel exegesis. But Let me give you one very swift reason why this is the case. So there's a discussion of motion in the logic, Hegel's logic, that we can talk about that next week.
Yeah, we will get to that next week.
Okay, but Hegel says this, look, what is it to be in motion? Well, it's not something to be here at one moment and here at another moment. Because after all, it could be at rest here at this moment and at rest here at that moment. So being in one place at one time and one place at another time doesn't suffice for being in motion. He says, what does it mean to be in motion? He says that to be in motion is to be both here and not here at the same time. To be in one and the same place on one and the same time, it's here and not here. Now, that's almost verbatim. Well, of course, it's in German, but the translation is almost verbatim. So this is a contradiction. It's got nothing immediately to do with dialectics. It's a bold-faced contradiction. And then just to rub this in, he says, where's he getting this contradiction from? He calls it from the dialecticians of old. And he's talking about Zeno. Okay. So, well, we can talk about Zeno's arguments next time, if you like.
Yeah, sure.
But, I mean, this is a case where it's really, really hard to interpret Hegel as anything other than a dialectist. Of course, there's a lot more to Hegel than this, but and there are many reasons why Hegel should be interpreted as a dialectist. For example, given his relationship to Kant and what he says about Kant and so on, but that's another long story. But at least that might do as an answer to your question for the moment.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and talk to you next week.
Okay, Emiliano.
Have a good week.
Ciao, ciao. Stay safe.